Step relax. We're going to get started. We just started the recording. If you would like, in the chat, put your name and where you work, geographically where you're located, just so that we sort of know who's here. That's always lovely. And I'm going to go ahead and get started before I turn it over to our wonderful presenter. Those of you who've been here before understand what's happening next. I'm going to remind you what's coming up in all of our wonderful MACA events. Sorry. Take care of this. So, welcome to the June Each of Us an Expert. For those of you who are new, Each of Us an Expert is a series that MACA started during the pandemic. It's an online sort of presentation by career professionals for other career professionals. We try to do 6 of these a year. This year, because of the timing of the conference, we are likely only to manage 5. So we do these every 2 months. We had a major sponsor for our 2022 conference, which was Career Thought Leaders and the Resume Writing Academy. For those of you who know and follow Marie Zimenoff, she is, again, a thought leader in our field, and CTL and RWA were major sponsors for the conference, and we want to make sure that we thank them repeatedly because we need our sponsors for a all-volunteer conference. And we will be looking for sponsors and exhibitors for the exhibit hall for the upcoming MACA conference, which, okay, yes, we need volunteers, but the upcoming MACA conference, which is coming up November 7th and 8th in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the Liberty Mountain Resort and Conference Center. Apparently we had a huge number, I think the largest number of requests to present that MACA has ever had. So clearly there's a lot of energy around this conference. So make sure you're going to be there because it's going to be amazing. The other upcoming events are the MACA meetups, which we do monthly. These are facilitated networking events. We usually pick a topic and then kick it around and share resources, information, insights. It's always lovely to be together. The next MACA meetup is Monday, July 10th at noon. And Tiffany Dowell is going to be facilitating that workshop, and she's all into ChatGPT, which is everywhere. And so she wants to facilitate a conversation about what everyone's hearing about ChatGPT, how people are using it, what concerns people have about it, tools that they are liking. So if ChatGPT is something that you're interested in, come join us on July 10th for the next meetup. And our next Each of Us an Expert will be in August. It's Monday, August 14th at 4 p.m. And our presenter is Emily Frank. She is on NCDA's DEI committee. And so she is going to be talking about NCDA's initiatives on diversity and inclusion, equity and inclusion. If you have any interest in that, come hear Emily present. It's good for all of us to know what NCDA is doing because those largely are going to represent best practices in the field. So that will be August, Each of Us an Expert. And finally, I'm so excited that Ebony agreed to present for us. Before we got on here, I was talking to Ebony about all the presentations I remember her doing in the past. She hasn't presented in a while, so I'm glad to get her back on a stage. Ebony is going to be talking about Tenderhearted career solutions for transgender and transitioning clients. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to her. Thank you, Ebony.
Thank you, Karen. Really glad to be here. It's good to see some familiar faces, some Maryland folks as well. I'm going to pull up some slides here. All right, can y'all see that all right? Yes, great. So just share a little bit about what we're going to learn today, or what I'm going to share. I'm going to talk a bit about compassion and grace, helping skills, labor market and resources, employability skills, and then ethical and legal issues. And you may recognize some of these competencies because they were part of the Global Career Development Facilitator competencies. And I have a private practice. It used to be called Eidolon Career Solutions. So I've been talking about career management, teaching, sharing. I'm the former president of the Maryland Career Development Association as well. I love doing talks like this. I am a career consultant. I'm a clinical sociologist by training, and I'm a human resources and OD organizational development professional for over 18 years. And so I bring all of that HR background, that hands-on applied sociology perspective to the work that I do, not just with my career consulting, but also when I work with other career services professionals. I do have a Master's of Arts and Leadership Studies from a Unitarian Universalist seminary. And so I look at my work also from a faith-based perspective, a very progressive, liberal, faith-based perspective. I consider my career consulting as a ministry. This is one of the ways that I do my little piece to make the world a better place. And so when I talk about compassion and grace, I'm coming from that perspective of humanity and doing what we have within our scope to do to make the world better. And it starts one person at a time, one client at a time. I also have a master's in strategic human resources and organizational development from Johns Hopkins University. I am a certified HR professional as well, global career development facilitator, instructor, and career services professional. And I am a lay community minister as well. So it means I do a lot of community work with a faith-based perspective, as I mentioned. And a big part of my community ministry is I serve the LGBT Community Center in Washington, D.C. It's a large center that provides a lot of services to the LGBTQ plus community. And two ways in particular that I support there is I'm a facilitator of their job club. So every week they have folks coming in who are seeking career support. And then also they have something called Center Faith, where they support the emotional and mental health of folks by doing interfaith work. And so we just had our big interfaith service last week that I participated in as well, where I talked about interracial connections. So that's me. And when I'm not doing all this stuff, I have 2 cats, 2 kids, and a spouse. And I had the cats first. They were first. They were about 15. I had them before my spouse and the kids. And my favorite food are Oreo cookies. I have some sort of Oreo every day, whether Oreo cupcake or Oreo pudding, or that's my little comfort food. All right, here's me doing my thing a little bit. So again, here's me presenting, doing workshops. I do some advocacy work, and also I do some guest preaching around the topic of living into our calling and workplace justice as well. And so you already did introduce yourselves a little bit in the chat. So thank you, Karen, for doing that, for facilitating that. I do want to mention about questions. So I'm anticipating we're going to have some questions, and I would like you to know that at the end of the session, I will make time for that. So we'll have some time for questions. So if it's all right with you, if you have a question that's burning, just put it into the chat so that you can just get it out right away. Because at the end, we're going to come to questions. And then also at the end, you'll have the opportunity to just verbally share any questions you have. All right, so let's jump in here. Compassion and grace. I start with this. I'm starting with this because this is the core of why I do this work, why I work with transgender folks. And from the beginning of my private practice, I've always worked with a diverse group of folks, whether it's Gothic people, nerds, or people with unconventional career paths, or the LGBTQ plus community. I've always worked with diverse folks, historically marginalized groups. That is kind of one of my sweet spots or specialty areas. And I've got to say that my transgender clients, out of all the clients I work with, they are one of the most discriminated against out of all that I work with consistently. And that's for a number of reasons. But if we think about what is a transgender person, they are someone who the gender that they were born with or their sex, it does not align with the gender that they identify with. So there's a disconnect there. And so that's what a transgender person is. The identity that they were born with or that's on their birth certificate isn't who they identify with now. And so they often have a lot of intersecting oppressions. So many times, not only are they transgender, but they may be young, have to be a minority. They also face, they may have mental health concerns as well. And no comprehensive federal law protects them. And this is another reason why they are one of the most discriminated groups of clients that you can work with. There is no federal comprehensive law that protects them. Unlike Black people, unlike religious oppression, where there are laws very specifically that protect them, that's not the case when it comes to transgender people. Transgender folks, they also have elevated rates of poverty in comparison to others, increased stigma. They face a lot of harassment, not just at work, but just out in life. And 54% of transgender people experience violence. And many of them are die because of it, actually, particularly transgender women of color. There's often a lack of healthcare coverage for them because they have a higher likelihood of being unemployed or not having healthcare coverage that covers their unique needs. And this can exacerbate health issues. So again, thinking about these intersecting oppressions, these additional obstacles that they have. And then in terms of mental health, 32 to 50% of transgender people attempt suicide. They attempt suicide. I was working with one client and they told me, they said, if I didn't transition, it would have killed me. That's what they told me. And I asked, and that came up because they talked about how expensive their transition was and how long it took and how kind of it was very difficult. And I must have given a look like, wow, like, why would you do that or something? The kind of look I must have gave, but they said, they didn't have a choice. It was either they transitioned to be who they are or they would have died. And it just, that really hit me hard in terms of just understanding how difficult things can be. And this is important to understand in the context that we're working with in terms of our mindset and how we approach things. And also in terms of having compassion and grace, many times I know with my other clients, I may encourage them to reach out into their network. That's something that we as career professionals like to say to our clients, reach out to your network and do interviews, informational interviews, and get more information and see who can network for a job. What I have found is that transgender folks who have recently transitioned, they just tend to have a smaller network. So that strategy in general doesn't tend to be as effective. And so that's something else to keep in mind, because we don't want to encourage someone to do something when the outcome may not be worth all the effort. And where it can also be a bit traumatizing to say, go and talk to people that you may not, they may not feel comfortable with when they're just now getting comfortable with themselves. And then also having compassion and grace for the understanding that transitioning is different for every person. And you may know this, but I'll just say it anyway. Someone who's transgender, they may or may not have had surgery. They may be happy with their physical body, or they may choose to do something different medically, or they may not. Maybe they want to, but they can't afford to because it costs too much, or they don't have the health care, but it doesn't mean that they don't still consider themselves transgender. So how someone transitions, the experience they have, whether it's really affirming to them or it's traumatic for them, but they're still glad they did it. The reason for it is very different. There's no one size fits all. And that's something that I've come to find out. And the outcome may be different. I may talk about this briefly, but some transgender clients, some transgender people we may work with, some of them can pass, quote unquote, more effectively than others. And this also can impact their job search. You know, can you look at them and just automatically tell that, oh, this person might be transgender? Or do they pass very well and you wouldn't know anything unless they told you? I mean, these are just realistic things that impact the job search and can impact other related factors. So then the next thing I wanted to talk about is helping skills. Um, this is information that I've just gathered just from my years of working with transgender clients that I want to share as something that has been really helpful and really powerful. I didn't start out doing everything perfectly. Transgender clients just kind of came to me and I did my best and used all of my skills I had. And then I started to learn a process. I started to learn things that were that worked better for them, that didn't always work well for my other clients. And so that's what I preface this with. And so for the setup, like how do I start out? I always remember just the emotional labor that many transgender people are coming to us with. It takes a lot of labor to be transgender, emotional labor, just dealing with the daily grind of it, all those things we talked about in the previous slide about the different stigma, discrimination, the mental health. This just, it's a lot to take in. And so I come to the space with helping them with that, again, that compassion and grace, but understanding the emotional labor that they come with and that their bandwidth may be pretty short. You know, they may not have the emotional bandwidth to do too much. And so making sure that when we ask them to do something or we have homework, quote unquote, that we're giving the minimum that will give them the most return on their investment because their bandwidth may be pretty short because of all the emotional labor that they're going through. Also, I found that transgender people who are coming for career services, they tend to, not all the time, but they tend to be really eager for a solution, really eager for a fresh start. And some of this has to do with that they're more likely to already be unemployed. It's harder for them to find a job. So they're really thinking about, I just need a job right now. I need my resume done. I need to get a job. And sometimes this can make it hard for them to think strategically and think long-term because they're so eager to just get that solution they're looking for because they're in acute pain. They're in acute employment pain. And so they want something really quick. And so it can be challenging to set a pace that makes sense so that they can get the results that's really going to help them long-term. And then the other thing is to let them disclose their gender or that they're transgender. And not to ask about that unless it's about pronouns. Oh, what are your preferred pronouns? Many times, if I get a request from someone who's looking for career support, they may say in their email, oh, I'm a transgender person and da-da-da-da. So they'll tell me up front. And that happens a lot. Or just in conversation, they may just say, I have a question about my references because I'm transgender and my name changed. So just let it come up naturally. There was a time where I would ask, and I totally would not do that now, just because I don't think it's the best thing to do. Just let them disclose, even if you're thinking maybe they are, don't worry about that. Just let them naturally disclose at their comfort level. Again, I used to ask because for me, I thought, oh, this is helpful for me to know up front so that I can better help them. But I had to reframe it in terms of not what I want or what's helpful to me. I want to do what's most comfortable for them, and that is letting them disclose up front, or letting them disclose, in their own comfort level, in their own time. But I have found many are very open just to say it right away. And then the other thing is gentle and powerful questions. And this is aligned with the whole emotional labor piece. And so there's these two questions here that I highly recommend as a really good place to start or to take into account when you're working with transgender people to ask, can you imagine yourself feeling safe working there? When asking them about a potential employer. You can also ask, is there anything that worries you about, X, Y, Z? That's a very open-ended question, and it can just open up such a rich conversation. And so these are my two go-to questions when I'm working with my transgender clients. It helps to demonstrate that I'm thinking about their safety, their feelings, and that I am curious about worries they may have, and I want to open up discussion, because once you understand someone's worries, you can really get down to the nitty-gritty of how to better support them. And then finally, I mentioned encouraging that strategic thinking and deep reflection, because many times I have found that they're very eager for a solution, very eager for a fresh start, and sometimes they want to go a little faster than some of my other clients, just because they have an acute need at the moment that's really painful, and that I'm sure we can relate to. But I found that helping them to slow down a little bit, think strategically, it takes a bit more effort. And so I'm ready for that. I have that top of mind to remember to remind myself to use questioning and support around that for deeper reflection, so that they can have some better outcomes. All right, and then I want to shift into labor market and resources. In the last few years, there's been a lot more labor market information and data around transgender people and how it relates to the workplace. Here are some resources that I really like, that I pull from, to really help me understand on a broader view the employment landscape for transgender folks. And I take this into account in all the recommendations I'm sharing with you today, and in all the work that I do. Some of these labor market resources say LGBT, so it includes all, but what I like about these is they pull out transgender folks, and they have a lot of information just about transgender. And I appreciate that, because in previous years, when I presented on this kind of topic in the past, it was much harder to tweeze out the transgender piece. It was just blended in with everything. But now we know that when you compare transgender people to the rest of the LGBT community, transgender people continue to have not as good outcomes as the rest of the LGBT community. So transgender people have a harder time. They are at, I teach sociology, and we use this term stratification to show the different layers in the hierarchy. So sociologically and statistically, transgender people are at the bottom of the hierarchy per se, when you look at the whole LGBTQ plus spectrum. And that's the reason why, again, they are most likely to be discriminated against. They have more likely to commit suicide than the rest of their queer counterparts, more likely to have to be unemployed. And so again, just having a really difficult time. And again, that's why the grace and compassion is so important. So these are some of my favorite labor market resources. And in this next slide here, I'm going to show you, these are a couple pictures of those sources that I just shared. From the Census Bureau, this one, a report from the School of Law, UCLA, Labor Economics, National Bureau of Economic Research, World of Labor, Trans People, Wellbeing and Labor Market Outcomes. And so all of those articles, all of those research papers, labor market information I just shared, there's some things that we could pull from that, and that I'm pulling for you right now. And in short, when you look at all of those, this is pretty much what they say. And this is something that I've been saying in the last couple of slides as well, that transgender people experience more economic insecurity. They're more likely to use unemployment insurance, more likely to have lower employment, to have insufficient critical health care benefits. They have especially high poverty rates, even compared, again, to their queer counterparts. And transgender people are more likely to be BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color. They're more likely to be young. And transgender people are more likely to be experiencing a disability. So when we think about the context of the intersectionality of these different identities and different experiences, it really compounds on them. And again, that ends up resulting in a low bandwidth with all the emotional labor that they're having to go through every day. One of the findings from that labor market data did show, and I find this very interesting, that women and non-heterosexual people, that means other LGBTQ plus people, women and other non-heterosexual people are more likely to have significantly more positive views about transgender individuals, and they also show higher support for employment and non-discriminating laws relative to men. So how does this play out in the workplace? So this means that, for example, if you have a client who's transgender and they're weighing two jobs, let's say there's one job here and another job there, and they have an offer for both. If one of those workplaces has more women, or if the direct supervisor is a woman, but in the other job, that supervisor is a man, statistically, they will probably get more support from the woman supervisor. That is what it is. This is just what the research says. And so when we're helping our clients to make decisions or supporting them and talking about what their needs are, it can be helpful to share with them some of these kind of statistics that might help inform what they decide to do, and also understanding the context that they may be working with. Keeping in mind, some transgender people are already in the workplace. So it's different from someone who is already at work and they're transitioning at work, or if they're trying to go to a new employer that may or may not know about their identity. Here are some resources that I often share with transgender folks that I work with. So regardless of what state they are, and I see clients all over the US because I work remotely for the most part, so I can get a client from anywhere. There are these state LGBT centers that are all over. Some of them are based on city, but all you have to do is just go to Google or Bing or wherever your favorite search engine is and put the state name or the city name plus LGBT center. And you will find the centers that are in that client's city or state. And this is really helpful for them because these centers have tons of resources. They can have, they may advertise jobs from employers who are LGBTQ plus friendly, counseling resources, all kinds of resources, because we know that transgender people have additional hardships on top of everyone else, even when it comes to their queer counterparts. They have a lot going on. And so for them to really take advantage of some of these resources can be invaluable. And that's why I'm sharing it with you. So I would highly recommend that you share this search with your transgender clients. Tell them, hey, put your city in, and then plus LGBT center, and then go there and see what they have that can help you. And so this is just a quick example here of, for example, I mentioned that I work at, I provide services to the DC Center for LGBT community. So if you were to type in DC and LGBT center, this would come up, and then there's plenty all over. And these are just great resources. Another resource, did you know, and this I just found out very recently, that there is a Google Chrome plugin called Dead Name Remover. And dead name is sometimes what the LGBTQ plus community call the previous name of someone who is transgender. The name that they no longer use, we call it a dead name. So there's this plugin called Dead Name Remover, and it will automatically remove and replace your old name with your new name, anywhere that it appears online. So this is just something to share with your clients because we know as career professionals that our online digital trail can matter. What we have on LinkedIn, what we have on wherever, that can matter. And this can cause undue stress for your.
I'm not so sure this is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so this can cause undue stress for your client. And so by giving them a resource like this, it can really help a lot. All right. Employability skills. With transgender clients, I highly suggest focusing on that low-hanging fruit kind of job search strategies, specifically things like avoiding uphill battles. Remember, the emotional bandwidth can be very short. Because again, there's all these other things that they have to worry about that they're going through, that they're dealing with, from mental health to healthcare to just trying to navigate. It's just so much. So low-hanging fruit is your friend. Avoid uphill battles. And what do I mean by avoid uphill battles? A piece of that is trying to focus initially on LGBTQ plus friendly employers, not just applying to anywhere. Avoid these uphill battles. There's so many employers nowadays that are LGBTQ plus friendly that there's enough to choose from. And so why, apply to all these other places, when there's low-hanging fruit that has plenty of opportunities and that are looking for this kind of inclusion in their workplace and that they want it and they're seeking, and so there's great opportunities for that. Another piece around employability is for transgender folks, I highly recommend that they avoid stating their previous salary. And we know that this is something we try to avoid our clients doing anyway, if they can help it. But I find that for transgender people, this is particularly important because they tend to have lower incomes than others and some other compounding factors that make their previous salary just so not in line with where they should be, that by stating it just puts them behind even more so than someone else. So this is something that I really help support my clients in, and that I recommend that you do as well. Just really focusing on how can we not have to state our previous salary? How can we do everything but that, if that's asked? And then resume gaps. You may find as you work with transgender people that you may see more resume gaps than you might in your other clientele. Just in my work, it tends to be because of mental breaks or physical health. And then unfortunately, sometimes it's because they get let go from their jobs because it's something that has to do with their being transgender or just discrimination because of it. And so you will see more resume gaps. And so helping to coach around that, and this is a piece that we coach our other clients about, but really digging into it a bit with our transgender clients will be helpful because, again, this is something that is a bit more prevalent. There's this quote by Potter Stewart, and he says, ethics is knowing the difference between what you have the right to do and what is right to do. Ethics. And I bring up this quote because, as I shared earlier, there is no comprehensive federal law that protects transgender people in the workplace and much else. And so keeping in mind that there are employers out there who have very open policies embracing and looking for transgender people for their workplace. And so those employers are ethical. The law may not say they have to do anything, but they're ethical and they want to make a difference. And so because, again, there's not that federal law that protects them, going to that low-hanging fruit, those employers that are open and looking and wanting to diversify and add to their workplace. I was recently at the Society for Human Resource Management conference last week, and former President Bill Clinton was one of the main speakers. And he said that, and we probably know this already, but he said that diverse workplaces are more effective, they do better, they have higher outcomes, better outcomes. And so we know that diversity makes things better. And these other employers who are very open to transgender folks, they are too. Nonprofits. There are a lot of nonprofits out there that are very progressive, and they're EEO statements will be very open, and that's a good way to determine, who's progressive and who's not. But nonprofits, I have found to be one of the best places to encourage transgender folks to apply to, because they tend to be very open, very supportive, have comprehensive healthcare, just really good things. The Human Rights Campaign, they have a corporate equality index. They've had this for years. I remember teaching on this topic many years ago, and the Human Rights Campaign corporate equality index was there at that time. So this is a long-running, very credible index where you can send your transgender clients, have them go and look at this, and it helps rate and rank different employers in terms of how inclusive they are in terms of LGBTQ things. The federal government, most federal agencies are very inclusive and welcoming. I have found that the agencies that are more like military-based tend to be a bit more conservative. Those that are less so tend to be more progressive. And so I keep that in mind. But a good thing that I like about the federal government is, even though there is no comprehensive federal law that protects transgender people, in the federal government, there are protections for transgender people. And so they can get some of that safety that they may not get in the private sector. And then the final thing is, one of the strategies I encourage is looking at meaningful diversity statements. The diversity statement will say a lot. I was looking at a diversity statement of a university the other day, and it talked about, it said, we're diverse and we're open to everybody. That's as it's aligned with the Bible. And so it was kind of like saying something and then going over what they said with something that contradicts. And so I was like, that's not a meaningful diversity statement. So you can tell a lot from the diversity statement of an organization, whether it's higher ed or a nonprofit or whatnot. And so that's another way to determine if they're going to be progressive or not. All this is low hanging. Ethical and legal issues. One thing that I don't really ever have to deal with per se, with other clients that I do have to work with regularly with my transgender clients, are their identity documents. I learned so much about identity documents working with transgender people. I got a big education on it. So what do I mean by this? We're talking about your ID, your passport, your legal papers, because many transgender people, they will change their name. And that often can be a legal change, or they may not legally change it. They may just have their preferred name and keep their legal name. Only until the last couple of years, it's become less difficult to legally change your name. But there are some states even now that don't allow someone to legally change their gender unless they have had surgery. But as we know, as I mentioned earlier, transitioning is different for everyone. It's different for everyone. So not every transgender person wants to have the surgery. And to say that you can't legally change your gender unless you have the surgery, that can feel really intrusive and makes some feel like there's a lack of privacy and disrespect, that they have to do this to do that. And so the whole identity document can be very complex, and it can be different based on the state that the person is in. It can also be expensive as well. And so there's a lot of reasons why some transgender people don't do this, or they do. But at the end of the day, this impacts us as career professionals, because we may get questions about, well, when do I disclose to an employer that I'm transgender? Aren't they going to find out when my name, I put my name here on my resume, but I have to put it a different name on my application because it's a legal document? And they may ask, can I even put my preferred name on my resume, or does that have to, be my legal name? And so there's a lot of questions around this. A lot of questions. And the other question that I get, I helped a transgender person to get a job at a new place. And then they reached back out to me because once they started work, their work email actually had their dead name. And they were very upset. This was very traumatizing to them. And I wish I would have talked to them about how to communicate to HR and to IT about that first so that they could adjust that before it happened. But it didn't occur to me. And so this is something that I'm sharing as a lesson learned. So encourage your clients to, if their legal name is different from their preferred name, if they ask human resources and or their IT department to make sure that whatever their work email they have is consistent with the name that they prefer, the name that they feel comfortable with. Now, I've also seen in the federal government, this is much harder to do, much harder to do. In the federal government, legally, it's okay, your email is what we put on your, we use the name that's on your legal paperwork. You can't do any of this preferred name stuff. And so I've seen that from many federal organizations, agencies. I'm not sure if it's all, but I've seen it in many, much harder to do in the federal government for whatever reason. So you may be asking or thinking, well, when should a client disclose, or how do I deal with reference letters when you're working with your transgender clients? And I can do a whole workshop just on those things. But if you do have questions about it, feel free to put it in the chat, or we can ask at the end. The other piece around just ethical issues I want to talk about is something called secondary traumatic stress. And this occurs when you have lasting emotional or psychological symptoms after absorbing information about another's trauma. As I shared, throughout this presentation, transgender people have a lot going on. And I have found many of my transgender clients, they also have therapists they're working with, counselors for other things. And at least the transgender people that I work with, many of them feel very comfortable just talking about their experience. And at least with me, they feel comfortable to talk about this, that, and the other. And it helps me to get an understanding of the context that they have in which I'm working with them. But it can be a bit much sometimes. It can be really, it can break my heart. It can break my heart. Some of the stories people tell me, the violence they've experienced, the pain. I can't reach out to my former boss because they're the ones that said this in front of everybody and made me feel like I was nothing. Just there's so much there. And I have found that with my transgender clients, I've had to build a bit of a tough skin around that piece. I have to take a lot of self-care and just make sure that I'm managing this piece, because it can get really rough sometimes. And so for your own self-care, if you're not willing or able to, to manage secondary traumatic stress, then you might want to refer your clients to someone who might be better suited to handle that, because you also have to take care of yourself as well. It's very important. Oh, and the other piece is, and we know this because I'm preaching to the choir, right? We all know as career counselors that we are not therapists, and that, there is a difference between a career counselor and a career facilitator, and, we can go into all those terms. But my point there is to remember the line and boundary that we draw in terms of what our role is, and how we help support our clients and how we take care of ourselves. So don't be a therapist unless you are, and unless that is the context in which you're working with. We know that. I'm just saying it can get a little more challenging than usual with transgender clients. So because of that, I love to refer out. I love to help my clients to be resourceful. One of the things that I did wrong when I started to work with transgender people more, I overhelped, and as I reflect back on it, I felt, just taking on that secondary trauma and feeling in my heart like, oh my goodness, this happened to this person. I would excuse me, I would overhelp my transgender clients as a way to like make myself feel better about what happened to them. And I just felt my heart just broke for them, and I felt like I needed to do more in certain ways. And I had to pull back on that and really step into my professionalism and really discern within myself about, am I really helping or am I enabling? And I shouldn't be feeling sorry for my clients. I need to feel excited and supportive of them, and just managing that. It took me a little bit to get to that point where I could do that, and I'm naming that because it happens. I'm human. It can happen to you as well. And so I encourage you to refer out and help transgender people who are working with you to be resourceful, not to enable, but to be resourceful. And so again, that's why these LGBT centers are so helpful. And also maybe if you do know a therapist or someone else who works with LGBTQ plus clients, you might refer them to your client. Or if your client is working at an employer that has an EAP, an employee assistance program, you might want to refer them to there as well. But I tend to do a good bit of referring out for additional resources to transgender folks, a little bit more than I do for some of my other clients. And I will say that, again, these centers are awesome. Like, you refer your client to a center in their city or state, and that one center will have all kinds of resources. It's like the only referral you almost need to do in some cases, because many of these centers are just so rich with resources and they know, like, they deal with LGBTQ plus people all day long, so they're really good at guiding folks along. So that's just another plug for that. That's just a great resource. All right, we're recapping now. We're recapping. Compassion and grace. That is just the number one. And I think that's why I continue to do this work. I purposely specialize in and reach out to historically excluded groups, marginalized people with career issues that they have everything everyone else is going through, plus these additional things. That takes a lot on me as a human being. And I do it because of compassion and grace. I do it because I feel that's one of the ways I help make the world better. And I do it because it makes my heart sing. It makes my heart sing. We also talked about some helping skills, labor market and resources, employability skills. Very important. Ethical, legal issues, very important. Self-care, understanding the legal landscape. Now, in terms of legal issues, I do want to mention, even though there's not comprehensive federal regulation, in some cities, in some jurisdictions, you may find some legal protections for transgender people. But again, it's not comprehensive, so it can be helpful to look. However, just because something in the law says you can't discriminate doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So again, avoiding those uphill battles. All right, so that was our recap. And this is our just final summary, overview, takeaway. So I've said all this stuff, and some of it, this might make your head spin. And I do consider this training to be a higher level training. This isn't for folks who are just starting to work with transgender clients. I mean, this is really, you need to be, a career service professional for a little bit to get to here, okay? And I say that with love. I say that, I understand, and I will name that this is a lot of information and that it is complex, but that we can do it. And we will better serve our diverse clients when we come from this perspective. And so if I were to just summarize everything, the main takeaways in just 3 points, I would say, number one, when it comes to transgender people, are you ready to move from affirming to learning? Are you ready to move from affirming to learning? This is really important because you know how in the past it was all about diversity. Diversity was the big word. And now many of us have evolved from it. Instead of all about diversity, we're about inclusion. We've gone from diversity to inclusion to belonging. We've had this evolution that's helped reframe our perspective and shape our hearts in terms of the work that we're doing to the world. And so the number one thing is, are we going from affirming transgender people? Like, oh yeah, I'm not biased, I'm not discriminatory, I'm welcoming of LGBTQ plus people. That's not enough. We need to move from just affirming that to really learning. And one of the first steps in that are coming to workshops like this, where you're learning something new, where you go, after this workshop, you go to those market research places that I suggested, those different articles and studies, and learn, really learn. So not just affirm, but learn. And number two, a takeaway is working with transgender clients, this takes a high level of technical career facilitation skills. This is not, you really want to come at this with some high level technical career facilitation skills. That's just the truth of it. If you come at this, or if your colleagues come at this without having high level technical career facilitation skills, you can really hurt someone. Again, I shared the mental health, the high emotional labor that these clients are going through every day. These are people's lives. Yes, we're helping them with their career, but their career is a part of their life, and they are going through a lot, many of them. And so it requires a really high level of technical career facilitation skills. And so remember that, be at your best game, be at your best when you're dealing with your transgender clients. If you do your best work in the morning versus the day, make sure that you are seeing your transgender clients when you are at your best. Because saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing can be particularly traumatizing and painful for this particular group. And so if you do plan to continue to work with transgender folks, continue to learn more about them so that you can better serve or refer out whatever is going to work for you in your own understanding and ethics. And then finally, the third piece is holistic self-care and boundaries. So we talked about taking care of yourself. I talked about my own struggle with the secondary stress, trauma. So self-care for yourself, self-care for yourself, have your boundaries. Remember, whatever scope that you're working with them in, to stay in that scope. And same with your clients. They may be so used to talking to their therapist about all kinds of stuff, and to you, they can see you as another therapist, but you got to remind them, with love and with gentleness, of the boundaries, not just for you, but for them. So take care of yourself and help your client to take care of themselves. All right, we're all done there. This is me. This is my LinkedIn profile. I'd love to continue the conversation with you. Find me on LinkedIn. There I am. That's how my LinkedIn looks. And I would love to just stay connected with you if I'm not already. All right, it's question time.
All right. First of all, Ebony, thank you so very much. That was just really fabulous, enlightening, well organized, gave us, as you said, moving from affirming to learning, and you helped us do that today. So thank you very much. There was one question that people were really taken by, and that was, you mentioned that transgender people are more likely to have a disability, and people are like, can you talk about the data, or why would that be?
Yeah, great question. So in the labor market data, when there's been studies and statistics around transgender, they ask them to identify certain traits and certain experiences they're going through. Yes, transgender people are more likely to have a disability. Now, what is a disability? We know it's not always physical, right? It can be. But there are mental disabilities. You can be have mental issues, and we also know that transgender people tend to have more mental health issues as well. And some of it just comes from being traumatized and being discriminated against or violence. There's a higher incidence of rape as well for transgender people. That can cause post-traumatic stress. There's a really prevalent disability with the transgender community. And you can't see that, but that is something that is a disability. I do have, I don't remember I won't say how many, but sometimes the surgery can cause a disability. Sometimes the actual physical surgery can cause physical, problems as well. However, I will say that when it talks about disability, most likely we're talking about mental disabilities that you may not be able to see. That's exacerbated by just being transgender and post-traumatic stress and mental illness, suicide attempts, things like that. That's not to say that all transgender people are running around, all kinds of problems. That's not the case. I have some clients who are transgender and they're doing very well. But they've gone through that phase where they've gotten to the point, they've got the support they need, and they're strong. But not everyone is there yet.
And I'll just point out, I don't know if you want to highlight it. I'll try to make sure they show up in the article that I do. People were putting some resources in the chat. I don't know if there are any that you want to comment on or amplify on.
Let's see here.
So it was one transcanwork.org in California. Sterling Cruz Hare, which or her, I guess it's her. Transwork.org in Philadelphia. So there, again, what's encouraging is there are lots of resources out there for.
Yeah, and what I found is those LGBT centers that I talked about, they will refer people to these kind of organizations. So they're like the hub for coming in, and then they will triage them out to other resources just like these. So excellent.
And I'm going to answer one other question here. This one's mine to answer, not yours. And that is, we have not managed to do all the paperwork to do clock hours for the Each of Us an Expert series. So these are for our own professional development, but we don't have clock hours for them. Sorry, guys. We're working on it. But MBCC makes it a little complicated, I think is fair to say. Any other questions?
I had a quick question about the Chrome extension, the plugin you mentioned. I'm not positive, but I think the one that I'm most familiar with changes only the name that is on your view, like the screen of the user who has that extension installed, but it does not change the name to external. Like, I guess what I'm saying is it would not help with the digital trail aspect where people would see your dead name in different websites. So it changes it for the viewer, but not for external viewers who are looking at the similar website.
Well, that's good to know. I mean, I think there may be other extensions that do similar things, and it can be a resource that you can say, hey, try this and see if it helps. Anything will help. As I shared, this is something that came to me fairly recently. And so I have to say, I haven't tried it myself, but when I get resources that seem like, oh, this might help something, I like to share and have it as, in someone's toolkit to use.
Sure.
Thank you for that.
All right, any other questions? We're believe it or not, we're at 2 o'clock. We're already done, people. So any last questions before we finish up for Ebony?
Karen, I do know, in terms of continuing education, in terms of, I know there's other certifications people might have. Sometimes if it's not already given, you can provide some information that they could say this does qualify. If anyone needs extra whatever about my credentials, if you want to try to get this to qualify, feel free to message me on LinkedIn and I'll provide whatever is asked for. So I know I've done that myself where I wanted clock hours for something and I just wrote the extra little information. So if that helps anyone, happy to.
That's a good point. Like this, not NBCC clock hours, but other groups or other certifications that require clock hours. And so thank you. That's a really generous offer, Ebony. That's really generous. All right. Any other questions? Again, thank you all so much for being part of this. Don't forget the next meetup is July 10th at noon. And the next Each of Us an Expert will be in August. And just again, huge round of applause for Ebony. What a fabulous, fabulous presentation. And I have a question for you, Ebony, if you want to hang on as everyone goes. I just had a quick question for you. I'm going to save the chat so I have everyone's resources to write this up. But thank you all.